Hello and welcome to another episode of the Iceworld podcast. I'm your host, Nadia, marine biologist working at the British Antarctic Survey. Normally on this podcast, I speak to people live from Antarctica at Rothera Research Station. But today I'm here in Cambridge to chat with Team Seymour, who have recently returned from Seymour Island, located to the east of the West Antarctic Peninsula. This episode will follow on nicely with the last bonus episode of Iceworld, where I spoke to the director of the British Antarctic Survey, Dame Jane Francis, about her Antarctic fieldwork experiences carried out at Seymour Island in the 90s. To draw parallels with field living and working on one of the muddiest Antarctic islands, I'm joined in the studio with British Antarctic Survey paleobiologist and project leader Rowan Whittle, field guide Sam Hunt, paleobiologist Saurav Dutta, and paleobiologist James Witts from the Natural History Museum in London. The team left the UK in January this year and spent 5 weeks in Seymour Island, only returned last month. Fresh out the field, I spoke to them about their hardcore field mission. Rowan, could you please introduce your project?
This is a project where we're looking at seafloor community structure around Antarctica, and it's at times of different climate in the past. So looking at when Antarctica was much warmer and it was covered in trees, and that's the greenhouse period. And then it became glaciated and became covered in ice, and that's the icehouse period. We were looking at 2 time zones on the island, looking at the late Cretaceous and the community structure in the late Cretaceous, and then over the mass extinction horizon where the dinosaurs died out. And the other project was worked on by me and Saurav, looking at the Eocene from 56 to 34 million years ago, when Antarctica was very, very warm and then started to cool. And we all worked together on the different projects. But Saurav and I are trying to look at environmental change and the composition of the communities through this time period in the Eocene.
So James, introducing you, bringing you into the conversation. So you're joining us online from the Natural History Museum in London. What was your past involvement with the British Antarctic Survey, and how did you feel being involved again with a vast project?
Yeah, so I did my PhD at the University of Leeds quite a long time ago now. I finished in 2016, and the project was working also with BAS, working with these fossil collections from Seymour Island. So I've actually worked on material from Seymour Island for a long time, but I never got to do field work during my PhD. And so it always felt like, a bit of a sort of missed opportunity. So to have the chance to do this field season was really amazing, actually.
So when you got the opportunity to go to Seymour Island, was there any moment of doubt, or were you just like, absolutely, yes?
Oh, no, absolutely. No doubt. Yep, definitely going straight away. And it was funny because it was one of those funny opportunities that I wasn't, I didn't think this was ever going to happen, really. I'd sort of resigned myself to the fact that I probably wouldn't ever get to Seymour Island. And then Rowan got this project funded, and BAS has this really interesting kind of funding scheme where if someone's got a project funded to go to a site in Antarctica, you can apply to this funding scheme. It's called CAS, or Collaborative Antarctic Science. And you say, basically, this person is going to a site that I'm also interested in. Here's a project I would like to do at this site, and can I go as well? And they're really competitive. It's quite rare to be able to get one. So I was really lucky enough to be awarded that funding to basically go along with Rowan and Saurav and Sam.
So Saurav, bringing you into the conversation, you're sat here with me in Cambridge at the British Antarctic Survey. Can you describe to me your background and how did you get involved in this project?
I'm a paleobiologist. I did my PhD from India, and I looked at the response of marine benthic mollusks to different climatic and tectonic shifts which happened in India. During that time, the Himalayan uplift happened, monsoon came in. So what was the evolution of benthic marine organisms to those changes? And then I was looking for a job in UK when I don't know if I said this to the team before, but I gave an interview at the NHM for the same position which James gave.
So that's the Natural History Museum.
Yes. And then I got to know about this position from Rich. because obviously I was not chosen. And then I got to know about this position and I applied here. And then I got to get myself involved in this project.
So Sam, you're a field guide that has worked previously with the British Antarctic Survey. You're remoting us in from North Wales, where you're preparing for a climbing qualification. Could you share a bit about your background? What kind of Antarctic experiences do you already have? And what attracted you to moving away from Antarctic glaciers to a muddy island?
Probably masochism, I imagine. So in last 5 years, I think I've spent about 3 of those in Antarctica. And in that time, I involved in the facilitation of quite a lot of projects, mostly glaciology, but also biology, and then some geology, and this one paleontology. What attracted me about this one, I think it was that it is so different to the rest. I think one of the big appeals of working down south is the unknown, and the new challenges that you can have down there. So just operating from the ship, so we deployed from the Sir David Attenborough, was a completely new thing for me and had a great appeal. But again, something different. And also, I think the project itself was quite an appeal to me as well. I studied geology quite a long time ago. And so following down that vein, I think, it had quite a lot of interest for me in that as well.
Sam, what kind of preparation did you have to do in Cambridge to get ready to take a team to Seymour Island for 5 weeks?
What typically happened would be that when the project was outlined, my bosses or the people in the field department will look through and make a rough decision of what kind of things we'll need to facilitate that. So that'll be the timeline, so access to the ship. Maybe we'll need this equipment, where we're going to get it from. And my part starts where we have this rough idea and it needs refining. So that's a large part of the preparation in Cambridge, was to that end, really. So I'd sit down with my bosses and be like, cool, what are we doing? And then we'd be talking about things like, what do we need? How many tents do we need? What kind of, how much food do we need? How much fuel? Look for the details that we need. So chatting to a lot of people. So I remember having multiple conversations with Jane Francis about her time down there. I was chatting to the captain of the SDA as well, to try and get a better idea of how we're going to deliver this.
Rowan, you've been to Seymour Island before. How did you prepare for this trip compared to past expeditions?
So I first went to Seymour Island in 2009, and it was kind of as a postdoctoral position. It was 2 years after I finished my PhD. And I kind of was just part of the team at that point. Whereas this time I was leading the project and I had to do all the sort of run-up process that I wasn't particularly involved with before. And this involved lots of paperwork, filling in environmental permit forms and sorting out cargo and packing all the field equipment and making sure we had everything.
Did it make you appreciate just how much the leaders of past projects had to do to make a project happen?
Yes, exactly. And also like how amazing all the different bits of BAS are. Like I had to talk to so many different people, from the sort of vehicles yard people, people working in operations, people working in the supply chain logistics, the BAS medical unit. Like there was lots of different people involved in preparing us for this field season.
Saurav, was this your first time in Antarctica?
Yes.
And how did you feel before leaving?
Stressed, because this was an opportunity of a lifetime, and I was so keen to go that I had this was something which I had to constantly think of, not to hurt myself, be fit, so that I can qualify the medical test and go there. So that was the feeling, more or less, before leaving for Antarctica.
Did it feel quite surreal that you were going to go to one of the most isolated places on Earth?
Honestly, I didn't realize it before I actually went there. I was like, okay, yeah, people talk about Antarctica. I've seen Antarctica. It's going to be unique. But when I reached there, it felt the most pristine place ever to go. And it was amazing.
Amazing. And James, how did you feel having Seymour Island come to life, something that you'd worked on so many specimens, and I bet you read so many papers about it. What was that like?
Yeah, it was very surreal. I mean, it was surprisingly emotional, actually. actually getting there, it's sort of a weird thing to say, isn't it? But when we were on the little cargo tender going to the island for the first time to drop stuff off, it was kind of like, this is a big deal. This is a place that I have, as you said, read hundreds of papers on and looked at thousands of fossils from this site and spent days of my life sieving sediment and doing all these things in a lab in the UK. And to actually get to go there and look around it and to explore it and to study it in person was amazing. And I did feel strangely emotional.
What a fantastic opportunity. Rowan, what were your greatest apprehensions before going?
I had a lot of worries before we went. I guess being in charge of a lot of the sort of prep work on the paperwork side and things, I was very worried that I'd forgotten to do something and that we'd like get on the ship and I'd be like, oh my God, I forgot something really important. So I worried a lot about that. But then there was lots of other things, like maybe we wouldn't be able to get off the boat, find somewhere to land. Maybe we wouldn't find the fossil sites. Maybe we won't be able to collect good data. Where are the sections? I mean, like, my worries were manifold, I have to say. I didn't know Sam and Saurav very well. I was like, will the team get on? Will everyone be okay together? And what do we do if they don't get on? So yeah, there was a lot of different worries going around my head. And I guess also in addition to that, I was worried about it being the first time that I'd left my 2-year-old daughter for more than a couple of days. So I was very worried about leaving her behind too. So yeah, I had a lot of worries before we went.
It's super brave for you to do that as a mum as well, and as the only woman in a team of 3 men as well. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I guess I was a little bit apprehensive about that to start with, but everyone was so nice in the field and everyone was really respectful of everyone else in the field. Everyone was very kind to each other, and if somebody was having a bad day, people rallied together and tried to help out. And if people needed space, we gave people space. I think as a team we worked really well.
It's intense. You're living together, working together 24 hours a day. Saurav, being your first venture to Antarctica, how did it feel boarding the Sir David Attenborough in the Falkland Islands and sailing into the Southern Ocean?
It was grand. The first time I looked at it, I was in awe with the sheer size of the ship. But then I experienced my first seasickness when we were on the Drake Passage, and that was not fun. I never knew that feeling existed.
So you've never been seasick before?
No.
First time in the Southern Ocean?
Yeah.
Impressive.
But then when I saw the first iceberg, like people kept talking about seeing first iceberg and how it's so special. I felt it. It was amazing. And then I saw like the wildlife. Everything was so beautiful and pristine. I just loved it. Yeah.
What was it like seeing your first whale?
So we were testing our radios there, and suddenly I see a splash of water in the horizon, and then I say, Sam, is that a whale? He was like, where? And then after a few moments, we could see it again, and it was amazing. It was like a beautiful start of the journey. So yeah, it was amazing.
Amazing. So cool. Gives me goosebumps. Sam, how did you get onto Seymour Island? What was the process and how have people accessed the island in the past?
Well, I think there was a lot of trepidation in it at the start. Say, if you look at a map of Antarctica, the northern part of the peninsula, you'll see like all these little dots of like white islands where there's snow covered, again, traditional Antarctic scenery. And amongst that, you'll see this little splodge of mud, which is Seymour Island. So on the side of the Sir David Attenborough, there's some of these small little ribs, little boats. You can head out and they can just zip around. And so we jumped onto the shore with those and had a look around. We're like, yeah, this is going to be a place. We had to move some ice out of the way. And then one of the smaller boats again on the SDA is one called Terror, which is a cargo tender. So we loaded all our kit onto that. Had a big load of people as well to help out. So just moving all our kit out and just got it to shore, and it was really easy. It was remarkably simple.
What preventative measures were you going to take if someone was theoretically to get stuck in the mud?
Oh, we had ones from the simple to the absolute ridiculous. So we had the access to these rescue pontoons, which are really good. They are used in mud rescue, but it's essentially just a walkway that you can use. So you plonk it down and ideally go and pick them out. But like mud, the challenges of mud was something that I hadn't really dealt with much before, so I had to try and seek out a bit of knowledge on actually how to manage that and what do we do.
What about compressed air? That was my favourite one.
Oh, the compressed air, yeah. So a way of getting them out is to try and liquefy the mud around it. And so way you can do that is with like compressed air by just getting a hose and like jetting air into there to loosen up the mud and just pull them out.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. Honestly, to so many people, it's kind of unimaginable that mud can liquefy. Saurav, how long did it take to set up the camp?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because this is the time when I can talk about Sam and how big a savior he was for us. He was so precise with his planning and stuff. It was amazing. So setting up the camp was relatively easier, if not for the weather. The 3 tents, our sleeping tents and the toilet tents, were very easily set up. It was like bish bash bosh. But then we tried to set up the main tent, which was supposed to be our hangout place, and that was a nightmare because it couldn't withstand the wind. I think Sam can better tell you about the technicality of it, but we tried to set it up and the wind was relatively strong, so we couldn't set it up the first night. So in the meantime, we used a toilet tent for our kitchen. But thankfully, the next day the weather was good and we could set up the main tent as well, and that was a lifesaver. So in total, it took us 2 complete days to completely set up the camp.
With the professional working kitchen.
Yeah.
James, could you describe to me the landscape of Seymour Island upon your first landing?
I would describe it as a strangely beautiful place, because it really is, as we've all said, a big pile of mud. The rocks on Seymour Island are not even really rocks. They're completely unconsolidated, even though they're millions of years old, tens of millions of years old. Obviously, there's no plants, so the landscape is completely bare of anything but rock and maybe some snow if it snowed. But the snow melts away. So it's a very sort of stark landscape in many different shades of brown and green and occasionally orange. But it is a very beautiful place. It's not quite like, I'm sort of struggling to compare it to anywhere else because it is very unique, but it's kind of like parts of the sort of Midwest of the US, like some of the desert there. But it's really a unique place. But on a not so nice day, it's really not very beautiful, but that's the challenges of field work, right?
Absolutely. Does it almost feel slightly extraterrestrial as well from your description?
Yeah, we were saying that you sort of expected, Mark Watney to walk over the horizon in a spacesuit or something like that. It's sort of this Martian landscape. It wouldn't look out of place in a sci-fi movie. Or if you put like a red filter on it, then yes, you could be standing on Mars or on another planet. A very muddy planet, but yeah.
Sounds crazy. Rowan, do you remember what your first experiences of Seymour Island were like?
Yeah, I mean, it as James said, it does have its own beauty. But I guess my overriding memory was the mud. There was, I sinking in the mud and falling over in the mud and getting covered in the mud. It is very muddy. It can be stunning. But yes, it's muddy.
James, specifically, what samples were you looking for to fulfill your science objectives?
Yeah, so my project was looking in particular at this one little slice of geological time. So the kind of layer of rock that we know corresponds in time to this boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene time period, so 66 million years ago, where we know from studies elsewhere around the world there was one of these mass extinction events. So a time when a very large proportion of life on Earth died out over a very short period of geological time. And in fact, this is the most rapid mass extinction event because it was probably caused by effectively a huge asteroid that collided with the Gulf of Mexico. And the evidence for that impact event is preserved in the rock record all around the world, including on Seymour Island. But mostly that comes across as fossils and rock samples is the basic answer.
Amazing. And is there like a layer across the world that you can see where exactly this extinction event happened, and how would you sample for that?
There is, yeah. I mean, this is one of those amazing pieces of science that's come out in the last 40 or so years. This asteroid impact, the asteroid came in, it smashed into the Earth, and the asteroid basically vaporized, threw up this dust cloud. And in that dust cloud was a lot of material that was part of that asteroid. And asteroids have a very distinctive makeup, including a lot of elements that are really rare on Earth, but are common in asteroids. And those rare Earth elements rain out of that dust cloud onto the land and into the ocean. And they're preserved in the rock record, and in particular this rare earth element called iridium. So all around the world, if you go to the middle of the Italian Apennines, if you go to the Midwest of the US, if you drill a core in the Pacific Ocean, if you go back to this KPG boundary layer and you sample the rock, you find this spike in this rare earth element iridium everywhere. And people have done this on Seymour Island. There's one location on Seymour Island where they've recorded this iridium anomaly. So you can literally, and that corresponds exactly to where loads of these fossil groups disappear. So you can literally put your finger on this mass extinction. But again, you don't know exactly where that is until after you've done the analysis, after you've been back from the field.
And helps to further build that map of geological dating over the island.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. Rowan, what kind of samples were you looking for?
So my research is trying to understand how modern Antarctic seafloor ecosystems evolved. And so the seafloor ecosystems around Antarctica today are really unusual compared to the rest of the world. So they're dominated by these organisms that don't move around very much, and they generally get their stuff from the water column, like suspension feeding. And there's not a lot of shell-crushing predators around. So it means that it compared to the rest of the world, where things are dominated by sort of burrowing mollusks like bivalve gastropods, the actual things that live around Antarctica today are just structured in such a different way. But we actually don't know when that evolved. So the idea is to look at different time periods and look at the community structure of the seafloor organisms at these different time periods.
Wow, that's absolutely, it's super cool. And of course, evolution doesn't stop, and it's not just constrained to certain periods. It's happening all the time. Yeah, thank you for explaining. James, how did you select your field sites?
For me, it was relatively easy because, as I said, this layer of rock, this KPG boundary layer, outcrops right the way across Seymour Island. So my sort of initial plan was to kind of just work my way along that and to sample every, at regular intervals along it, and to study the geology as we were going along. I was originally going to do sort of 7 kilometers right the way across Seymour Island, and there was no way that we were going to do that. It quickly became very apparent. So restricted ourselves. We did about 2.5 kilometers.
Sam, what was your living situation?
Oh, the living situation. So we had a camp set up, and in that camp we had the sleeping tent. So these are the ones that look most familiar, that are kind of like off the shelf, like mountain tents that you can get, like that you'll see on videos of people in like the Himalayas, or you might see them around a campsite in the UK. They're pretty hardy, they're lightweight, they're modern, and they're quite comfortable. Yeah, so we had 2 tent in those. We had a toilet tent as well for a bit of privacy and some shelter from the elements. This is like a old style pyramid tent, which are a bit of an Antarctic heritage item, but one of the hardiest bits of canvas I think you'll ever see. And then where we spent most of the time, we had like a big living tent, like a mess tent. So that's where we'd cook our meals. It's where we'd enjoy a downtime. And then when we were making our plans and processing samples, that's where that would all be done.
Excellent. And Saurav, what kind of Indian-inspired food did you take down with you? As the head chef, I've heard.
I took a lot of Indian spices. The good thing is that when I met Sam for the first time, it was clear in our mind that the food needs to be good. So, yeah, we planned it all, and he told me that he's going to get a bread maker and he's going to take care of the desserts. And I thought, okay, I'll take care of the main dishes, and then I just bought the spices accordingly.
But did you have to have an extra bag checked in to account for these spices?
I did. I didn't expect that, but yeah, it so happened that the spices were quite heavy.
I love the thought of just eating such great amazingly infused Indian-inspired curries on the muddy island within these like Arctic clam tents. I think it's quite a picture. Someone should almost do a comic book of it. Rowan, how did the weather influence you?
We were in the tents for a couple of days straight away because there was a big snowstorm and you can't look for fossils when there's snow all over the ground, and it was also very, very windy. And then we moved into rain, and we had a rainy period. And it's the first time I've encountered rain on an Antarctic field trip. This is my fourth or fifth Antarctic field trip, and it's never rained before for me. And that kind of surprised me, and it didn't go well with the mud, let's say. So the combination of it being the muddiest place ever and it being incredibly wet for a few days meant that everything was really, like, you couldn't touch anything without getting covered in mud. Like, you could barely move without getting covered in mud. And like the toilet tent floor flooded a bit, and like there was just water everywhere. And that was quite difficult part of the trip. And then we moved into like some really hot weather. So we had a few days where it was really sunny, and then we had to be really careful to make sure we all had suntan lotion on, that we weren't getting like heat stroke. Like, it genuinely was pretty warm. But then we had some stable weather where we got lots of work done. And then at the end we had a bit of wind at the end. So Sam might want to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, we'll definitely get onto that. James, how did you occupy your time when there was down days for bad weather? Was there still science to be done?
You know, you really spend the day not doing very much at all. A lot of food gets consumed, which is obviously a really important part of the day. I did find sometimes, though, that I would, actually want to kind of draw up the field logs that we'd made in the field or something like that, just while we were sat in the tent, because there really isn't anything else to do, right? You might be lucky enough to be able to go outside and have a bit of a walk. I read a lot of books on my Kindle as well, probably the most reading I've done for a few years, which was great. But yeah, I did find sometimes that it was actually nice to just catch up on some of the stuff that, maybe you're feeling like you're not getting the chance to do when you come back from the field and you're just absolutely knackered and just want to eat some of Saurav's amazing Indian food and then go to bed. So yeah, it was nice to be able to do that.
Amazing what you can also achieve without having internet. I think it's very nice to be disconnected from it for a long period. And like you say, like, you don't necessarily prioritize reading when life's so busy.
No, you don't. And a few people sort of said to me, though, before we went, they were like, oh, you're going to have a lot of time for thinking. This might be a really nice time to, I don't know, think about life. It was nice to just sort of relax and not think about things at all, and prioritize things like reading sometimes as well.
Yeah, rather than rethink your life choices.
Indeed, yeah.
Absolutely. So, Sam, why did the trip end unexpectedly?
We had some rather foul weather come through, in essence. Being where it was located, subject to some quite strong, like gusty weather. I'd hesitate to put a number on the gusty weather, but ultimately it severely damaged the camp. Like, talking about, like, the tents were getting crushed by it. There was broken poles. There was ripped canvas. It was quite dramatic in the time there. And we'd finished most of the science there. We'd finished all of the science, in fact. And so it was kind of waiting this one out. And the decision was made after a time that ultimately we do carry like spare equipment. We love a bit of redundancy when we're in Antarctica. But once you start using that kit, it means then you're out of your redundancy. You're on a time. Your clock is ticking, essentially. That you have to really think about moving on from there. And in discussion with the ship, they made themselves available, and we took the opportunity there. So we got an early uplift, and they scooped us off the island pretty quickly, actually. And we came back in calmer weather to collect the remaining equipment.
So you essentially did get evacuated?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow, dramatic end. Despite all of this, were you able to meet your science objectives?
Yeah, no, I was really happy that we managed to get both projects really good data sets. And I mean, it wasn't great that we got picked up early, but we had packed away all the samples for the main projects. We had some things planned, but the actual main science objectives, we'd already met them. So if it had to happen, it was a good time to happen. So yeah, I was very pleased with the data sets we've collected.
Excellent. So the final question that I'd like to ask you all is, what is your favourite fossil?
That's an easy one. That's an easy one for me. I already mentioned these things called ammonites. And on Seymour Island, you find fossils of a very particular type of ammonite, which has a very unusual shape. It's shaped like it makes a shell that is shaped effectively like a giant paperclip. It's called Diplomocerus, and these are one of actually the most common fossils you can find on Seymour Island. And it's such a weird looking thing, and we're still not entirely sure why this creature made a shell that was shaped like a paperclip, but they're such enigmatic creatures, and they're really interesting looking fossils, and that's definitely my favorite fossil. And we found lots on Seymour Island, so that's a bonus.
I personally like a stalked crinoid. These are sea lilies. They're actually very unusual in the fossil record because they're really delicate, and we found quite a few of them on Seymour Island now. We were lucky enough to find 3 articulated stalk crinoids with like branches and stalk and arms preserved on this field trip. I just like them because they're so beautiful. I know it's a bit niche, but I'm a fan of a crinoid.
That's definitely great to be niche. Saurav, what about you?
I'm fond of a trace fossil, which is basically which represents an activity on an organism. So I like the drill holes. So basically gastropods, some gastropods, they are carnivorous, and when they eat their prey, they basically drill a device called a radula. So they pierce the hard shells and get into the soft shells, and then it eats the soft shells up. And when they leave the prey is there with a drill hole preserved on it. So just by looking at one tiny hole, you can basically tell a whole lot of story about predator-prey interaction. So I'm very fascinated with drill hole.
And Sam, what's yours?
I'm a pretty basic guy, and so I quite enjoyed picking up the shark's teeth, if I'm honest.
Amazing. Make a good necklace.
Yeah. I'd put them in a hat. I think it looked really nice.
And Sam was one of those people who seems that when you take somebody into the field who's not necessarily a specialist, like their specialism is not paleontology, they always tend to find a particular type of fossil. And Sam was it was like magnetically attracted to him. He would always find shark's teeth wherever we went, which was great because they're useful and a really important part of the ecosystem. But it was really interesting that Sam, everywhere we went, I think he found shark's teeth.
Amazing. Well, thank you everyone so much for your time. It's been so interesting to hear about a really unique project, something that's on an island full of mud, living in tents, and you still were able to fulfill your science objectives. So it's been great talking to you. Thank you for sharing your stories and insight, and good luck for part 2 of the field project. And thank you very much for tuning in to this bonus episode of the Iceworld podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe and leave a review. It is super useful to spread the word about stories from Antarctica.